First of all, Commissioner and all of you, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Before I actually give the historical context of what's going on in Maine and what's going on with Bangor Christian Schools, I'd want you to know this is a deeply personal issue for me. I was raised in a wonderful Christian home with consistent, loving parents, but my first 2 years of high school was filled with very dark and destructive behavior that I hid from my parents. At the end of my sophomore year, I begged them, even though they were both employees, my father was a Hall of Fame basketball coach, and I was not a bad athlete, but I begged them to go to Bangor Christian Schools, and thank God they let me go. I was weak, and I knew it, and I needed faculty, and I needed schoolmates that would support my parents' worldview rather than tear it down. And those 2 years completely changed the trajectory of my life as I came back home to Christ as a result of that Christian education. My freshman year in college, I answered the call to Christian education. I wasn't expecting to be involved in education, but I knew that I wanted to give every family the chance that I had as a result of Christian education. So upon graduating, the next 19 years I spent in Massachusetts in exile as a maniac. But then my last 8 years as a headmaster at Bangor Christian Schools. So the 2 years that I spent there as a student, my faculty who were former students, teachers of mine, said that I spent about the same amount of time there in the principal's office as I did when I was a student. During those 2 years, though, as a student, many families took advantage of what is the second oldest school choice program in our country. High schools, or towns that did not have high schools, were allowed to pay the high school tuition to any school at that time. And so it was a wonderful opportunity for those, especially rural and many times financially challenged people, to have access to a Christian education. But all that changed in 1980 when our Maine's Attorney General stated that allowing so-called sectarian schools to participate with public funding was against the establishment clause of the United States Constitution. That stopped, and then Maine's legislation then added laws and regulations that completely stopped all Catholic and Protestant and faith-based schools to participate in this program. It was a shame. And as an observer myself, as I said, spending years in Massachusetts as a headmaster, and then those last 8 years back in Bangor Christian, it was very, very sad. It was discouraging to watch attempt after attempt after attempt to reverse this bad decision. And our school was right in the middle of that. As a headmaster, we thought we'd be there, and then we'd lose. We thought we'd be there, then we'd lose. But then came Carson Macon. And Carson Macon means a lot to us. I hired Bonnie Carson as a second grade teacher, and then her son David, even though he didn't want to be there, was a student of mine at Bangor Christian School, and then that all changed. He put Olivia in, and Olivia is the student. Olivia Carson is the individual whose tuition is being litigated. But when Carson Mason first occurred, I have to admit I was buoyed by Espinoza and Trinity that was mentioned earlier. But I was afraid to be enthusiastic and optimistic because I had been jaded so many years. But I can tell you, when the SCOTUS came about and allowing those schools to participate again, saying that it was constitutional to allow that, we were exuberant. And I was down here with First Liberty Institute, and I was with the Carson family doing these proceedings. I was so happy. I was exuberant. I thought of the meetings that I'd had over the years with parents that tearfully had to take their kids out of school, because of finances. I thought of the moms, the single moms, especially in our state, that were praying and hoping for a good decision so they could have the same opportunity I had. It was so exciting. But unfortunately, not everybody shared my jubilation in the state. And Aaron Fry, our Attorney General, immediately put out a statement, and I've included his full statement, but basically he said that we were going to do everything we could do as administration to keep bigotry and intolerance and discrimination being funded in our state. But probably out of his quote, the most concerning one was saying the education that these schools at issue that offer are inimical to public education. Now, I started my education career as an English teacher. I have to admit, I had to look up what inimical meant. But it means adverse, hostile, by reason of malevolence. I had to practice saying malevolence a few times as well. But there was no irony lost on me that the first response to this wonderful SCOTUS thing that we've been waiting, this decision for so many years, that he would use a synonym of hostile, because his very first response was evidence of the decades-long hostility towards any attempt for religious education in our state. And so it was adverse, but thankfully, even though that the legislature took action that John talked about earlier, and that we have an administration that's very much against us, thankfully First Liberty Institute and Consovoy McCarthy have challenged that legislation in federal court, and hopefully the First District will uphold what the U.S. Supreme Court has said repeatedly, including in Carson and Macon, that Maine violates the Free Exercise Clause when it excludes observers from otherwise available public benefits. And that should include schools like Bangor Christian benefiting from their tuition program. So despite academic and social excellence that schools like Bangor Christian have shown, and so many other areas than social outcomes, Maine families still face blatant discrimination. But again, based upon my rescue story, this breaks my heart. And so I thank God for the Trump administration shedding light on this, and with this assembled commission, and thanks to all of you for your time in this process.